Hi, this is Ask a Decision Engineer. Listen in and find out how to untangle big decisions with less stress and more clarity. Welcome to episode 1 of Ask a Decision Engineer. I'm your host, Michelle Florendo, and I am an absolute decision-making geek. I hope you'll join me as I answer questions about decision-making and even let you listen in on some of the decision analysis sessions that I've done, helping people untangle big, messy decisions. Since this is the first episode, I want to give you a little bit of background on who I am, what I've done, and how this all started. I still remember about a year ago, I was sitting and listening to a talk from Jeff Weiner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn. And someone in the audience had asked him, what is the most powerful piece of advice you've been given over the course of your career? And he said, I'll share it with you. Go ahead, grab a pen, and I'm going to ask you to do something in 15 seconds that most people cannot do. So in the next 15 seconds, I want you to write down, what do you want your legacy to be when you look back on your life on your 80th birthday? I'm always up for a challenge, so I picked up my pen and started writing. And I was surprised at how easy the words came out. For me, when I'm looking back on my life on my 80th birthday, I want my legacy to be that I've changed how countless people view decision-making, from anxiety-inducing to empowering. Decisions are funny things. We make decisions every single day. I would say that it's an exercise of agency. It's how we're able to express our free will. It's what sets us apart as humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. Yet as empowering as this prospect can be, I've seen people experience a lot of emotions around decision making that seem to just get in the way, to the point where people will avoid making a decision at all costs, which I think is too bad, because what greater gift do we have than to make our world happen, as opposed to letting the world happen to us? When I tell people that I studied decision engineering at Stanford University in my undergrad years, I noticed that there was a certain pattern of responses. So the first reaction is usually, decision engineering. That sounds interesting. That's a thing? And then the second follow-up response is usually, wait, does that mean you know how to make good decisions? Can you teach me how to make good decisions? Because I'm horrible at it. And I would get this response again and again and again from very capable people, which made me think, what's going on here? You know, it's interesting. A couple weeks ago, I was giving a talk on decision making at Stanford's D School. And at the beginning of my talk, I asked the audience to bring up in their mind what is one big decision that they needed to make on the horizon. And then once they had that decision in mind, I asked them to tune into what were the emotions that were coming up as they thought about having to make that big decision. I then had the audience write down their responses and then pass them in on Post-its. And here are the words that came up most frequently about how people were feeling. Worried, anxious, stressed, choked up, confused, overwhelmed, nervous, don't want to choose, burdened. And some said excited. I find it interesting that even really smart people struggle with decision making. And it's not because people don't have the intellectual capacity. These people are really smart people. So I graduated from Stanford for undergrad. I went to UC Berkeley for my MBA. And so when I think about my classmates, there are a lot of people who are actually very capable and actually paid to make big decisions on a daily basis in their professional lives. And my thinking is that decisions in the business world can be big and hairy as well, but at least there's more structure to it. We've been taught a process. We know how to do a cost-benefit analysis, or we know how to calculate ROI, return on investment. But when it comes to big personal decisions, a lot of those things go out the window. I remember once I was at a conference and I ran into one of my classmates and she said, "Michelle, oh my gosh, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" She said, "I have a big decision in my life that I need to make." So I said, "Okay, sure. Tell me more. What are you deciding about?" And she said, "The rest of it." Does that sound familiar? So this classmate is a venture capitalist. She literally makes decisions for work worth millions of dollars. And yet she too struggled with some of these big life decisions. And what I find even more interesting is that sometimes people don't like admitting that they're struggling with a decision. I had posted on my LinkedIn once that I'm working on this project and I'm compiling a lot of resources to help people understand how they can move through decisions with more ease and clarity. So I asked people to post about what are some of the types of decisions you struggle with, or what are some of the questions you have about decision making. And what I noticed was that the number of responses that I received publicly as comments on the thread was absolutely dwarfed by the number of responses I received as direct messages privately. And so that makes me think, is this one of those things that we don't talk about? How to make good decisions? And why is that? Is there some sort of embarrassment around not knowing how to do this? Or some frustration around feeling like we should know how? Well, if that's the case, I'm here to tell you that it's okay. It's okay to struggle with life decisions because you know what? We've never been taught a real process for moving through them. Think about it. From the time we're small children, we are often asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" That's a big question, big decision. And yet somehow we're expected to be able to answer that without given the scaffolding of how to process that decision. Furthermore, we only focus on the options. I mean, I have a toddler. I actually can't wait until he gets asked this question because I'm going to teach him when someone asks him, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" to say, "Happy." And I know some adults will push further because they'll find that answer dissatisfying. Because the expectation is that we choose from a readily available set of options. Oh, do you want to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer? Can you tell I had immigrant parents? Teacher, firefighter. And so maybe at the most basic level, when we talk about decision making, we're only noticing the options, whereas there are actually more components to a decision than that. Also, a lot of the common advice out there on how to make big life decisions fall in three different camps. There's advice like, follow your heart. And then there are people who advocate for trusting your gut. And then there's yet other advice that talk about thinking it through. I'm kind of a nerd, and so I'm definitely in the think it through camp. What I find amazing is the lack of sophisticated tools we have to think through big decisions. When I ask people how do they usually make decisions, if they're not just following their heart or trusting their gut or thinking things through in a vague sense and actually using a method or tool, what they point to is the pro-con list, which is fine. The pro-con list is a step in the right direction. I am all for advocating for getting your thoughts down on paper. But the pro-con list is more than 200 years old. It dates back to the time of Benjamin Franklin. And surely, with how the number of choices has exploded and the number of decisions we need to make has increased over the past centuries, there's got to be a better way for moving through decisions. And that's why I'm really thankful to have discovered the discipline of decision engineering while at Stanford. It's an actual comprehensive methodology for thinking through or assessing and analyzing decisions. It's a type of methodology that's been used at NASA or making decisions around nuclear power plants, really high-stakes stuff. But there are some limitations, and that I didn't find out until I was already out of school and starting my career. You see, after I graduated from Stanford, I went into management consulting. And while it was a great place to start my career, after a while I realized it was not where I wanted to stay. And I felt really lost. I had no idea how to move forward. And it wasn't until a mentor pointed out, okay, Michelle, so you have this background in decision engineering that you use to help companies make the best decisions for themselves. Why not use that to help you make the best decision for you? Wow. Funny how it takes someone externally to point out something that's been under your nose the entire time. And the truth is, I hadn't thought of it because there are certain limitations to decision engineering. In decision engineering, you usually assume that people are rational human beings, which we are not. We have emotions. That's part of what makes us human. Also, it tends to rely on the fact that you can quantify outcomes, either in financial terms or in utility, which doesn't really quite apply when it comes to life decisions. We usually care about many more things. The objectives that we may have are multifaceted and often not measurable. How does one measure happiness or fulfillment? And then also, it's much harder to quantify or predict the probabilities of outcomes in real life than it is with some of the other applications of decision engineering. But what I found is that there were still some principles of decision engineering that did make mapping my path forward easier. And it's that discovery that put me on this path of learning how to adapt decision engineering for everyday life. That was almost 15 years ago. And over the course of my work, whether it's been coaching clients one-on-one through tough decisions, doing workshops on decision making, or giving guest lectures, I've honed and refined the way in which these methods could be adapted to make personal decisions less stressful. And one of the things that I kept hearing from people is that they were hungry for more. Where could they learn more about these things that I was teaching? And to be completely honest, I've had a hard time finding other resources that completely capture what I've learned in my work over the years. There's a lot of really great stuff out there, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of books that discuss descriptive models of decision making, or in other words, how is it that the human brain makes decisions? But it doesn't necessarily address how is it that we should make decisions. There are some materials out there on normative models of decision making. How should we decide? But they often make the assumption that this is how we should decide if we are totally rational, which we are not. I've also found that there are anecdotal stories out there on how individuals have made big decisions, and that's great because that captures what worked for that person. But what if you don't have the same personality or values or even resources as that person? The lessons learned may not be as transferable. I've also found some, little disparate tips and hacks, but nothing really comprehensive. And so as more and more people told me that I've got to share more about what I do, I thought, okay, sure, more people need to know. But it just didn't seem that urgent to go beyond the work that I was already doing to find ways to document this. Until about 18 months ago. I remember going to a meeting in San Francisco, and as I was walking up the stairs from the train, I found that I could not breathe. I ended up in the emergency room and then was transferred to the intensive care unit. And there, a doctor was showing me an x-ray of my throat. And he said, "You see this growth here? That's what's impeding your ability to breathe." They couldn't tell me what it was, at the time, but they could tell me that it was not supposed to be there. And in that moment, everything changed. I could feel the fear washing over me. But that was only one option for responding to the situation. The decision engineer in me took a step back and said, well, how valuable is this information? In decision engineering, information is only valuable if it'll actually change the course of a decision you'll make in the future. Did I have enough information to act at this point in time? No. So another option would be continuing on with life until I had more information that would change things. That was option 2. And if it weren't for all of the years I spent adapting decision engineering to incorporate the human aspect of things, I might have stopped there. But I realized that there was a third option. I was feeling an emotion, fear, and I could take the time to understand what was behind it. What was this fear about? What was I afraid of? To be honest, I was afraid, what if I didn't have much time left? My son was 18 months old. What if my time on this earth were limited? What if? And so I leaned into that even further. What if? What if my time on this earth were limited? Well, isn't it true that for all of us, our time is limited on this earth? And if that's true, then what? What does that mean? What could I do? Well, I could ask myself the question, am I spending my time the way that I want to? And for the most part, the answer is yes. The work that I do with my individual clients and when I teach in workshops and talks is incredibly rewarding. But there was that one piece about sharing this work more broadly. And that was the piece that needed to change. It's very possible that I may not live to see my 80th birthday, so there's no time like the present to share a window into what I've been learning about decision making over the past 15 years. Because you see, even though emotions do pop up and can be at the root of what makes big decisions difficult, they can also be incredibly valuable data, which, when you know how to process it and analyze it, can help you make decisions that align with how you want to live life. Because what is life but the sum of all of our decisions, right? So this is my experiment. In the following episodes, in this pilot season, I'll be answering your questions about decision making and letting you listen in on how I help other people unpack really messy, tangled decisions. And I hope you're able to learn some tools and frameworks for how you too can move through decisions with less stress and more clarity. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you know of someone who might benefit from learning more about how to make good decisions, send them a link to our website, askadecisionengineer.com. Also, the website is where you should go if you're interested in more resources on decision making, or if you would like to submit a question to potentially be answered on a future episode. Again, this is Michelle Florendo from Ask a Decision Engineer. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.